Welcome to Novara Live, coming up tonight in what appears to be an attempt to sabotage Andy Burnham's by-election. Wes Streeting has drawn battle lines over Brexit, saying he would like Labour to support rejoining the European Union. And we talked to Ben Walker, co-founder of Britain Elects and data journalist at the New Statesman, who's done some very interesting polling when it comes to the Makerfield by-election. Also, Palestine activists have their convictions quashed. And we discuss with one of those who has had their conviction quashed about that experience. And stick around to the end of the show to hear from Novara's own Richard Hames, who has a new report from Toby Robinson's Unite the Kingdom rally. And we'll also have some clips of their terrible singing, not Richard's, the performers at the Unite the Kingdom rally. I'm Michael Walker, and I'm joined tonight by Stephen Methven. Great to have you on board.
Hey, Michael. How's it going?
Very well. I avoided central London this weekend, so Richard has sort of gone and I suppose he hasn't put his life on the line.
But he's done it for you.
He's done it for us. Yeah. So I could just relax in Hackney instead of going to central London and seeing lots of far-right people being a bit scary. Before we get into tonight's stories, we just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has signed up to support our work since we launched our fundraiser 6 days ago. And we have massive plans to grow ahead of the next general election. And with more people backing our work, we can do much more. So thank you. If you haven't yet seen that we're moving studios, it's going to be beautiful. And we've put together a much longer video that takes you behind the scenes of that decision and shows you the room itself. I think it's a floor, actually, that we're going to develop into a beautiful new space. You also get to see Alex, Novara Live's producer, talking you through what the move is going to mean for the show. And you can see the massive computer that he works on and that everyone is sort of very impressed by because he looks like he's sort of controlling the matrix. Stephen, you feature in that video.
I do.
Tell me why people should join the many others who have already signed up as a Novara Media subscriber in the past week.
Well, I think there are loads of reasons, and I'll give you two. I mean, one is that I actually just believe that we're amazing. I'm sorry, that's not a line anyone's given me. I think we're really great. I think we do, for what we have, the most amazing work. You get so much bang for your buck if you wing us a few quid. And I'm coming up for 5 years at Novara Media, and I've just seen us go from strength to strength to strength, and I think that journey is nowhere near ended. But a second reason is not a very exciting one, it's not a very glamorous one, but it's a very important one, which is people don't know if we do good reporting on difficult topics that engage with politics or the law in certain ways, legal fees cost money. And that is something that is going to come up in a story later on tonight. In reporting on Palestine Action in particular over the last year, you can't imagine what it's cost just in terms of advice, checking that everything is right, making sure that we're safe while doing as much as we can in particular respects. So people don't often think about that, but that is actually a very expensive part of the work that we do.
I suppose there's two things you have to check legally. One is, are you libeling someone, right?
Sure.
Obviously, internally we want to be accurate,
yeah.
But the legal claims are, couldn't someone accuse you of libel, and would they have a chance of winning, and would they have the money to take you on? And then two, which could bankrupt the organization. Yeah. But then the second one is contempt of court, which could actually end with the reporter in prison. I don't know.
And with the editor having a jail term or massive fines. I mean, I think on the libel front, many of us have been legally trained now, so that we are very au fait with what does or doesn't count as a libelous claim or defamatory claim. And the circumstances.
Could you give us an example of a libelous claim that you wouldn't make on air?
Well, I wouldn't make it on air. So
you've
that's
done your training, Stephen. Very good.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not really the issue. The issue is more some of the reporting that we've done over the last year actually has engaged with an area of the law and of government which is completely unknown. It's been completely unprecedented, and I am talking about stuff relating to Palestine Action here. And as we've worked our way through this thicket of legal thistles, to mix a whole bunch of metaphors, that's cost us money.
Yeah.
And that's money well spent. but it's not money that our audience thinks of us as spending, but we do.
Yeah. And obviously, sort of as an organization, there's going to be a temptation to say, well, that's costing us a lot of money. Are enough people reading the article to justify the legal fees? We don't really want to use that logic, but the more we have in the collective bank account, the more we can sort of liberally say, let's take on difficult stories that might annoy powerful, rich people, or that might get us on the wrong side of the Home Office to some degree, or how do you stay on the right side of the law, even if you are annoying
exactly.
the Home Office?
And the risk is that if we don't write those stories, often no one will. So it's worth helping us to do that.
That's a very good pitch, Stephen. Go to watch the video. Go head to novara.media/support, and you can sign up from just £1 per month. Of course, as much as you can afford makes a huge difference. If Andy Burnham wins the Makerfield by-election, he's almost certain to become our next Prime Minister. Now, Makerfield voted 65% to leave the EU. Of course, that was back in 2016. So Brexit is not an ideal wedge issue for the Labour Party, which backed Remain. Now, Andy Burnham wants to go to that constituency and talk about the cost of living. Doesn't really want to talk about Brexit. So, can you guess what Wes Streeting decided to pop up and say this weekend?
Leaving the European Union was a catastrophic mistake. We can no longer afford to be silent about it. We must remake the argument. In 2026, the British people increasingly see that in a dangerous world we must club together, both to rebuild our economy and trade and improve our defence against the shared threats from Russian aggression and the retreat of America first. The biggest economic opportunity we have is on our doorstep. We need a new special relationship with the EU because Britain's future lies with Europe and one day, back in the European Union.
So as we talked about in previous shows, Wes Streeting, if he goes up against Andy Burnham in a future leadership election, has absolutely no hope. The polls are just overwhelming. Andy Burnham completely walks it, right? So the only possible route he has to Downing Street is that Burnham loses the Makerfield by-election, right? He doesn't want Burnham in Parliament, but he has sort of said, I want this. He said he wants him to stand. So that means he needs him to lose the by-election. If Burnham loses it, then obviously Labour is going to be depressed. I mean, it's going to look like Reform are going to win the next general election. Keir Starmer will, he's already damaged. He's not exactly going to get stronger. But the Labour membership will be a bit depressed and need something to sort of mobilise behind. They're sceptical of Wes Streeting because they think he's too right-wing. But if he can be the Remain candidate, maybe that will persuade some of them who might otherwise, not have been inspired by Wes. So this speech could be read with both of those interests in mind. How to help Andy Burnham lose, and then how to create a wedge issue within the Labour Party, which Streeting can run in on a future leadership election. And let's be clear, Streeting has confirmed that he has not given up on running to be the next Prime Minister.
Mr. Streeting, you've just called for a proper contest for the Labour leadership, and you called on Labour to step up. Are you going to step up and contest the Labour leadership? End the suspense now, please.
John, we need a proper contest with the best candidates on the field, and I'll be standing.
So I think he's saying that knowing, this is just my guess, I think he knows that if Andy Burnham wins that by-election, Andy Burnham is going to be the next leader of the Labour Party and the next Prime Minister. So my guess is that if Andy Burnham wins, he's going to say, look, there is so much momentum behind Andy Burnham. I think we've had enough contests. I think it's time to get behind him. He's going to ask for a position in Cabinet. I think he's saying that now because then if Andy Burnham loses, he can say, well, I've said the whole time I'm going to stand to be leader. So I think he wants Andy Burnham to lose. Then the next day he can say, the Labour Party is clearly going in the wrong direction. I'm going to stand and we should rejoin the EU. I mean, because at that point, he's also going to say, look, we've tried with the whole soft left, soft Brexit thing. It's not working. We can't win back these people. We need a different strategy. The strategy is going to be to mobilise our urban base. And you can see, I still don't think he'd win that contest, but you can see how that is clearly his best chance of becoming Prime Minister, something he's wanted to be since he was a small child. Not everyone was impressed with Wes Streeting's intervention.
I actually think this is just a bit odd. I listened to what Wes had to say very carefully yesterday, and I know that he's got a strong view about this and always has had, that we shouldn't have left the European Union. And, frankly, that's one that I share. I campaigned for Remain. I think it was a mistake, and I think the Brexit deal has been a real problem for us. But I don't really understand why the sudden focus on Europe. We're already, as a government, trying to repair in a pragmatic way the needless damage that was done by that poor Brexit deal to people's living standards in towns like mine without reopening the circular arguments that we ended up in as a country. And frankly, if the answer to all of this was the European Union, then essentially we'd be saying to people what was going on in 2015 in towns like Wigan was absolutely fine. Well, I can tell you that it wasn't, that people's living standards had been falling, people's high streets had been falling apart, people's kids had to get out to get on for some time, and that's to do with deindustrialisation and the failure of governments to address it.
That was Lisa Nandy, Culture Secretary, I think acting as a bit of a voice of reason. She's the MP for Wigan. This constituency, Makerfield, is in South Wigan, so she knows the people there presumably quite well. There is, though, a problem for Andy Burnham. I think Wes Streeting also knew this would be a problem for Andy Burnham, which is that Burnham has previously said that he would like to rejoin the EU. So this is the clip which has been recirculated this weekend. It's something that Burnham said at last year's Labour Party conference.
Join the EU or stay out? Long term, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say it. I want to rejoin it. I hope in my lifetime I see this country rejoin the European Union.
Now, obviously saying you want to rejoin the EU in your lifetime, right, that's different from saying you think it's a priority in the short or medium term. And that's also a point that Burnham tried to make in a speech today at the Great Northern Investment Summit in Leeds.
My view is that Brexit has been damaging, but I also believe the last thing we should do right now is rerun those arguments. Britain will be stuck in a permanent rut if we're just constantly arguing and people are pulling away from each other. It is time, surely, isn't it, to bring people back together, to focus on what we've got in common, to get the growth coming to all places so it's felt there. That is what we need in this moment. And it's really important that whatever comes out of this by-election, there's a more kind of unifying feeling about the change that we need to work towards. I am not proposing that the UK considers rejoining the EU. I respect the decision that was made at the referendum, and it's going to undermine everything I've said about strengthening democracy if we don't respect that vote.
I mean, obviously, Reform and the Tories have been doing it as well, obviously going to try and sort of put Burnham saying, I want to rejoin one day, next to his speech saying he doesn't want to rejoin in the here and now, and sort of say there's some contradiction here. This is a guy who blows with the wind. There's potentially something to that. At the same time, if pushed on this, Burnham can say, look, average life expectancy is 81. I hope to be alive for at least another 30 years. What I was saying is in my heart of hearts, in 30 years' time, I'd quite like to rejoin the European Union. But, I'm running to be an MP in the here and now, even if I'm Prime Minister. It'd be a bit arrogant to think I'll be Prime Minister for more than 10 years. This is something for the future because I don't want to reopen this debate. I'm sure he's perfectly capable of giving that answer. We'll have to wait and see if the people of Makerfield are convinced. Burnham was clear about the issues he does want to run on.
If I get to stand, a vote for me will be a vote to change Labour, because Labour needs to change if we're to regain people's trust. It'll be a vote to make life more affordable again, a vote to power up places, a vote to re-industrialise. This is the choice in this by-election. Do you want Makerfield and the North to stay on the same path it's been for the last 40 years? Or do you want a new path which brings the country back together and makes it work for everyone? I know why I'm standing. I know what I'm offering. I know what my party has offered in the past has simply not been good enough. The loss of faith of voters across the North, so many of whom once saw us as their natural party, is our fault and nobody else's. I want to help fix that, and I hope people will give me the chance to make that case.
So he's got an interesting pitch. He's saying, I'm running as an outsider. The Labour Party has failed you. I want to change the Labour Party. Obviously, very clear that he's sort of hinting if he wins this by-election, he then wants to be Prime Minister. So it'll be a new Labour Party under him. And he's saying there's been 40 years of failure, which also, by the way, implicates the new Labour governments that he was a member of. Again, you might call that flip-flopping. You might call that going with the wind. You might call that, political growth. Who knows? I'm sitting on the fence, frankly. Reform, in any case, have released their first set of attack ads for Makerfield. So one shows Andy Burnham with a suitcase traveling around various seats he was rumoured to have considered standing in. It says for his own career, not for Makerfield. Another is an Andy Burnham seat generator where all the options are anywhere. It's a slightly strange attack of Andy Burnham, who more than any politician is associated with a region. I suppose City can't in London, but sort of Andy Burnham is associated with the Northwest, Greater Manchester. He's standing in a seat, which most of it is in Greater Manchester. So the idea he's sort of just randomly picked a constituency out of nowhere, I don't know if it is going to land. Interestingly, it doesn't even seem to have landed with everyone from Reform. So we're going to have a look at a clip again today from that same conference. This is Luke Campbell, Reform's mayor for Hull.
Are you optimistic that if Andy Burnham became Prime Minister, he would use his influence to champion the north of England in the way he does as mayor?
I think he would. Look, I've met Andy several times. I haven't had a deep conversation with him about his politics, but he seems like a really nice guy to me.
What kind of Prime Minister do you think he would make?
I don't know. No idea. I guess we'd have to wait and see.
So that was the Reform mayor from Hull. He was asked specifically, do you think if he's Prime Minister, he'll do more to represent the Northwest? And he said, yeah, probably he's a really nice guy. Like, that is not the message Reform want to be putting out, is it?
No, but Luke Campbell is not your typical Reform politician,
He's an
right?
Olympic gold medalist.
Yeah, exactly. And he ran in Hull on a really localist platform. He just picked Reform because he said he would vote for them anyway. That he thought of running as an independent. So I don't think he's your typical Reform candidate, but he has a bit of like what people will be looking for Andy Burnham to have when he's in Makerfield on the campaign trail, right? A bit of sort of, independence, truth speaking, straying from the party lines. That's the way that if he's going to do anything in Makerfield, that will be the distinguishing thing for him, right? Reform is going to come out with all this Brexit stuff. And the test of Burnham will be not whether he can answer those questions adequately, but whether he can actually steer the political conversation to something else entirely. It's whether he can change the ground of the debate from the one that Reform and Wes Streeting have now set for him. Whether he can go on the offensive rather than the defensive against this insurgent party in the area.
Because I suppose he needs to make it seem as if it's Reform who want to talk about Brexit.
Exactly.
Because I think my understanding is sort of, there are obviously more of the country now feel like Brexit was a mistake than think it was a success. But I think that doesn't mean they want to talk about Brexit, right? That means in the past, let's let it go. I don't want to vote for anyone or even think about anyone who wants to talk about Brexit again, because the worst thing about Brexit was talking about Brexit. So if it seems like Reform are the party obsessed with Brexit, not Andy Burnham, presumably that would be the best case scenario.
That would be the best case scenario. I mean, the trouble is that Wes Streeting has taken us back to 2016 now. And so all Reform has to do is say that they're defending the thing that Labour wants to take away. That's the way that they'll get on side with that electorate there. Though, I mean, we don't know actually, it's been 10 years since 2016. That's when 65% of that constituency is thought to have voted leave. A lot changes in 10 years. Some of that obviously is translated to a preference for reform. But as you say, I don't think anybody really wants to relitigate this. The trouble is that Reform doesn't have to do very much. It just has to say, oh, well, you heard Wes Streeting and you heard Andy Burnham. Yeah. They're coming for this decision that you made. It's a pretty dirty trick by Wes Streeting.
Someone in the comments says, well, of course, Streeting is sabotaging. What else is he good for?
What else
he does seem... He's a slippery character, ambitious.
He's ambitious. He also has nothing to lose, right? I mean, one of the things I was thinking about when I saw that speech was, Wes Streeting is making the claim that he's making this claim that he hopes will sink Andy Burnham in Makerfield. But down the road at a general election, that's all on record that he's made that claim. So when it comes to the general election, it can be hauled out by Reform against him. So, he doesn't have the same... He's worried about Andy Burnham right now, but that might come back later. But then I thought, actually, I think what's going on here with Keir Starmer, as well as with Streeting, as well as many other contenders who might come forward, is an understanding that actually there's still a lot to play for in that election in 2029. We all see the polling now, which says Reform is, going to absolutely smash it. But I don't think what's coming through yet is that will be such a galvanizing election, because there'll be so many people who won't want to see a Reform government. And there's a lot of votes there for Labour to win. It's just not coming through in the polling yet. And that put me in mind of another 2016 feature, which is Project Fear. Because then it looks like what Labour is actually banking on is people being scared of reform in order to get their votes. Whereas it's a similar thing, point to the point I made before about Andy Burnham getting onto the front foot in Makerfield. Actually, that will be an indication that he'll also be able to get on the front foot when it comes to the 2029 election, which nobody in the front bench or the Prime Minister himself have shown that they're able to do so far.
Because Labour's campaigning has all been negative. It's been like the Reform are racist and the Greens are anti-Semitic, and that's been like it. It hasn't been anything more than that. Along with Brexit, the other issue Burnham has faced pressure on is the bond markets. In an interview with ITV on the weekend, he was pushed on his approach to debt and spending.
Number one, I have never said you can just ignore the bond markets. Number two...
Well, didn't you say we shouldn't be in hock to the markets?
I said that politicians have placed Britain in hock because of the way in which we lost control of our finances and public spending. And that goes back to what I said to you before, when we, if you like, handed away control of energy, water, housing. That has left Britain in a weak position when it comes to public spending. How can you control public spending if you're chasing rents in the private rented sector through the benefits system? How can that be done? So, I've quite clear, let me say this really clearly, I support the fiscal rules. There needs to be a plan to get debt down. But beyond that, we need to change politics and take the turbulence out of British politics, because that is a cause of uncertainty that then has that impact in the markets. I'm proposing here a new approach to politics, like we've built in Greater Manchester, more long-term, more collaborative. And from that platform, you create longer-term public investment plans for the country to retake control of public spending, because you've got further control of housing, energy, water, and all the rest of the things that I mentioned. And that is a really clear answer, and I hope people in the markets and beyond will hear it.
A little insider gossip. I just spilt a whole cup of water on my laptop, but the whole team gathered round. The laptop is now turned off, upside down. Jack came with tissues. Alex was there project managing as always. Rick still got my laptop in his hand trying to get the water out of it. What a wonderful team we have here. But I won't be reading your comments probably for the rest of the show because I am now sans machine. I thought that was a very good answer. Very sort of interesting, plausible case to make to say, a left-wing project doesn't have to be one that goes into more debt because we can bring down costs by ending, I suppose, rip-off Britain, where you've got all this money going towards private rentiers. Interesting, though, Andy Burnham has confirmed today now that he will commit to Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules, which is, I can see why he's done it, because he doesn't want a huge story during this by-election to be, if he wins the by-election, is it going to be the next Liz Truss? According to Alex Wickham at Bloomberg, the bond markets have been pleased by him making this commitment. On one level, it is a shame. I suppose you can say you can commit to it now and then break it once you're in office, or at least shift it once you're in office after you've had the opportunity to go and, send a message to the markets on your own terms, which is to genuinely convince them that if we invest all this money now, it is going to bring about growth. So you don't have to see this economy as a basket case, whatever. That'll definitely be a big story. Potentially, mainly that'll be a big story after the by-election, although we will be getting people on to talk about what Labour's vision should be if Andy Burnham wins in the coming weeks. Confirmations. We've got today that Andy Burnham is going to stick to the fiscal rules and he doesn't want to join the European Union in the here and now. The Greens have also confirmed something today, which is that they will be standing a candidate in the Makerfield by-election. They'll be choosing that candidate on Wednesday. Obviously, this was sort of controversial. People have been debating it, saying that sort of, why should the Greens stand down? Labour didn't stand down in Gorton and Denton, and when the Greens were sort of favourites, so Labour could have split the vote and handed it to Reform. Fair enough, true, correct. At the same time, if it's the case that the Greens don't have a chance in this seat, if it is the case that the Green vote is the difference between Labour and Reform Win it, there's going to be a lot of disappointed people. Stephen, you've been speaking to contacts in the Green Party. They're not exactly sort of shouting about this by-election on a megaphone.
No.
It seems like they're sort of, being relatively quiet about it, but they are definitely going to stand a candidate, so that they will appear on the ballot and presumably some people will vote for them.
That's right. So a candidate will be selected on Wednesday. But yeah, I think they're being fairly subdued about it. And my understanding about that is that they're kind of waiting to see what version of Andy Burnham emerges in the by-election. I don't know if people who have seen, we put out a video on Friday about who is the real Andy Burnham. There have been a lot of versions of Andy Burnham. He's been on one way of putting it, he's been on a political journey. Another way of putting it is that he goes on a political journey every weekend.
I think a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Right. So I think the Greens are just in a position where they're waiting to see which Andy Burnham emerges and what he has to say about a number of things that they particularly care about and that their voters care about. So those might involve things like nationalisation. They'd involve things like a statement on Gaza, something about that, even though that may not be of particular interest to many of the voters in Makerfield. It will be of interest to those voters who there's 11% of voters who voted Green.
Sorry, isn't this all a bit besides the point, though? Because once they're on the ballot, they're on the ballot.
Yeah, but I guess it depends to the extent to which they will campaign and whether indeed they might do some kind of deal.
But I don't know. But once you're on it, you're on it. I suppose it depends when the deadline is.
Yeah, it depends when the deadline.
I suppose you can select a candidate and then not. I don't. Yeah, we should know when the deadline is, but we'll work that out at some point.
Yeah, because yes, I actually don't know off the top of my head. But anyway, at this point, just on the selection of a candidate doesn't mean that there's not room for manoeuvring. And even when a candidate is on the ballot, you may lose some. If you just stop kind of campaigning at that point, you might, he might not get all of the votes, but he would still get some. But yeah, so there are some issues that they're looking at. I understand. To see where Burnham emerges on them, and one of them might be, for example, who in the current cabinet will be in his cabinet. Is the Labour right going to feature in a Burnham cabinet? Should he get that far? How amenable is that cabinet going to be to cooperating in various ways with the Greens as things go on? Very reasonable things to wait for, I think. Actually,
very reasonable things to wait for. The Makerfield by-election is the most important in a generation, which means there's a lot of pressure to try and predict what will happen. This polling has been doing the grounds. We mentioned it on Friday, in fact. It's from Britain Predicts and shows how the wards making up Makerfield voted in the local elections, which was 50% Reform and only 23% for Labour. It then shows how Britain Predicts forecast this would translate in a general election, so when turnout is higher, that gives Reform 41% and Labour 28%. But it then goes on to project how Labour would perform if Andy Burnham were the candidate in the constituency. And that's when Labour take the lead on 39 to Reform's 36%. Now, if that projection is correct, Andy Burnham will be heading to Parliament and most likely then to number 10. So, should we believe it? Well, earlier today, I spoke to Ben Walker from Britain Predicts, who was behind this research. He's also a Labour councillor in Chester. And I started by asking him how he projected a narrow win for Burnham in Makerfield.
We had the Gorton and Denton by-election in which the Green win was quite literally off the charts. It went over and above what even the most optimistic of the Britain Predicts forecast models said for the Greens in Gorton and Denton. There was an exit poll in inverted commas, taken by Salvation for Data Praxis a few days after, and it asked people who voted in the election, how did you vote, why did you vote? How would you have felt if the Labour candidate wasn't Angeliki Stoyer and instead Andy Burnham? And what you find is a very marked transfer of votes that I know even Green organisers on the ground concede would have happened. You have about 3 in 10 to 4 in 10 of those that went Green in that by-election, so they would have gone Burnham. And more interestingly, and I think telling of Burnham's gold dust potential, supposedly, with Reform voters, is that 1 in 10 to 2 in 10 Reform voters say they would go Burnham. You apply those vote splits, the splits of those voters, to the Britain Predicts standard model in Makerfield. And the Britain Predicts standard model is of generic Labour candidate, generic Green candidate, nothing fancy there. We tried doing this for Farage in Clacton years ago. And you find that the Labour disadvantage of, 12, 15 points, give or take, becomes a Labour advantage of 3 points. But just bear this in mind, in a by-election in which turnout is lower than the typical general elections type, that 3-point advantage for Labour is the equivalent to a few hundred votes to maybe even 1,000 votes. This is still a very, very tight race. But the thing we need to know about Burnham's favourability is it's there, it's present, it's relative. We're talking only 3 in 10 to 4 in 10 of the public do have a favourable view of him. But when you compare to Farage, Starmer, to a lesser extent Polanski as well, he is top of the pops, so to speak, right now.
And Makersfield voted 65% to leave. Wes Streeting, I mean, some people say unhelpfully, has reopened the Brexit debate. He spoke to the Progress Conference saying that he wanted to rejoin the European Union, and that would be his pitch to Labour members. Will this do damage if this ends up being sort of a rerun, or I suppose the question is, can this end up being a rerun of the Brexit election?
Can it? It depends whether the voters prioritise it in their minds. You know, the beginning, middle and end of what the voters are thinking about right now in Gorton and Denter and in Makerfield, which essentially is Wigan South, Runcorn and Helsby and so on and so forth, is the cost of living. The cost of living is king. It was king in the run-up to the Liz Truss bender period of however long it was. I can't remember the days. It has stayed as the most important issue of the hour to almost every single voter out there. Immigration trumps it amongst reform voters, but the cost of living is still there. Brexit, Remain, Rejoin, EU. How much to how many voters is it an important issue? And the answer is not many. But I think what's more important to think of this by-election is this: it's more on vibes, it's more on identity. Andy Burnham saying Britain should rejoin is not the same as Wes Streeting saying Britain should rejoin, because you have voters there who are willing to give Andy Burnham the benefit of the doubt, and then you have voters there who are looking at Wes Streeting and they don't have a favourable view about him. It honestly depends whether they give a damn about it, if they feel like they're being spoken down to, if they feel like they're being disregarded, if their voice has been disregarded. But then you've got to bear in mind that if you asked most voters, is Brexit the right decision, or rather, has it gone well? Most would say no. Most would say it's not been great, it's been poor, it's had an adverse impact on insert so-and-so and so-and-so. Would you vote to rejoin? Yes, the loudest voices in the room right now are those who want to rejoin, and then you have a great many Leave voters who, quite frankly, are uncertain. A lot of them would sit it out. This is why when people look at the polls and say people want to rejoin the EU, I would just say, just wait, because right now this isn't a campaign. This isn't a referendum campaign. This is one in which the people who want us to stay out are their most quiet, so to speak, on that issue. Right now they're voting on immigration. Right now they're turning out for reform. They're just a little bit, maybe embarrassed is the wrong word. They're just unenthused about the idea of the debate. That doesn't mean they can't be motivated by it yet.
Now, how much will this by-election be down to the campaigns, and how much have people already made their minds up? I mean, people already know Andy Burnham. They know what the Labour Party is about. They know what reform is about. Is it going to matter, who comes up with the best attack ad or who has the most canvassers knocking on people's doors?
Absolutely can do. The Green win in Gorton and Denton, I think it's fair to say, did come down to the campaign, in which there was a concerted effort to paint the picture that they were the option to beat reform. They were in contention to win the seat. It can matter. In elections, campaigns do still matter. Door knocking, visibility of the candidate, visibility of the canvasser on the door. It can have an effect of turning out 1,000 to 2,000, 3,000 more voters. In council elections, around about 10% of a council candidate's vote does end up being their personal vote if they're an incumbent. So they tend to do 10 or so percent better, not percentage points better, than they otherwise would because of personal brand. It does matter, and I think it still matters, because the thing we need to appreciate, and you referenced it at the start, the Britain Predicts initial model says this is going to be a reform gain. And then you factor in the fact it's Burnham. Well, maybe Labour will hold on with Burnham. To what extent, there are enough wavering minds? To what extent are there voters in those projections and the reinterpretation of the polling? To what extent they are undecided, sitting it out because they don't know in which position they sit? I think it's still pretty high. There is still a lot of antipathy, apathy more so, about Labour. And I think, yes, this campaign will matter. This battle for Makerfield is as Burnham even says it himself, it is the battle for the Labour Party.
And the country. The Greens are apparently selecting their candidate for the Makerfield by-election on Wednesday. Obviously, there was some division within the party as to whether they should stand or not. I mean, could that be make or break? I mean, if the Greens stand, could that cost Burnham the election?
Oh, it's tough. It's a tough ask because in Gorton and Denton, the Greens won emphatically, but most, emphatically amongst Asian voters. Among white voters, the Greens, I think, just about came second. They pipped Labour for second place in Gorton and Denton. Reform won it handily with more than 50% of vote among white voters, disproportionately in Denton. We did see in the local elections the Greens do very well. They won hundreds of seats. They're on course to pick up a few dozen parliamentary constituencies. But I am noticing it is very much constrained among more diverse areas. Makerfield is not that diverse. Nevertheless, they do still have some ground. They are picking up some seats in whiter parts of the world, but they're not exactly breaking through. I'll give you an example. St. Helens Borough, which is just neighbouring to Wigan. About 5 or so years ago, the Greens did really well. They picked up a fair few seats. They were winning council elections. And then Reform appeared on the ballot, and they lost all their seats. They lost all their seats in these parts of white working class areas. They still got a vote, but it was very much overstated when Reform wasn't on the ballot. They are probably going to pick up around, Britain Predicts says around 10%. I imagine Squeeze will push that down. But just to reiterate, adjust for Burnham, you have the Labour advantage at 3 points. Adjust for Burnham, you have the Green share at half of 10%? What was it, 5%, 6%, 7%, so on? That is make or break. Yeah, right. It could be make or break what the Greens do in Gorton and Denton.
If it's super close. And I suppose the Tories and Restore, people keep sort of talking about Restore eating into Reform's votes. I haven't seen it happen yet, but it's the sort of idea that isn't going away.
Yeah, Restore haven't stood anywhere else yet. They only stood in Great Yarmouth, and to their credit, maybe I shouldn't use those words. They swept all of the seats that came before them in Great Yarmouth. They did very well. Admittedly, though, not calling themselves Restore, they called themselves, the Great Yarmouth First Party, a very, very localist name. Reform did this years ago in Derby. They called themselves Reform Derby and got in on that. I don't think their literature was particularly reformy. It was very, very localist when it was in Derby. Restore, they are an enigma right now in that when they are put in opinion polls, not prompted, but as an option for other, they have picked up around about 2-3%. It's odd that. And you do have a percentage of voters, actually, admittedly, not much, who say they know Rupert Lowe. The best, barometer, metric, yardstick, I suppose, is that only about a quarter of Britons can recognise Zach Polanski when you show a photo of him. When they show Rupert Lowe, it's more like 5%. That is not nothing. That is not nothing. And, I have been running Britain Elects since 2013. And at the start, I was always saying social media didn't matter. What you saw on the internet didn't matter. We're getting to a stage now where I think, yeah, it does matter. And what you see on Twitter and what you see pushed on Twitter and what you see pushed on Facebook and so on and so forth is actually your town hall. That's your public square. And it's starting to have an impact. And I think Restore is one such example of that.
Let's make an assumption that there is, the outcome that we both favour. You're a Labour councillor. I want Andy Burnham to win this by-election. Let's assume he wins the by-election. One of the reasons he's popular is, people think he's likeable. People think he seems down to earth. He can talk to ordinary people. But there's a way in which being a mayor of a region, you don't have to take many positions on the most contentious issues of the day. Most importantly, I think you don't need a policy on immigration because you don't have borders to control. Also, I suppose national economic problems don't really get blamed on you. Let's imagine he does win the by-election. Let's imagine he does become Labour leader. What do you think are the chances that the moment he enters number 10, the polling suddenly collapses, his personal popularity, and then this whole conversation sort of transforms and we're back to square one?
It's not unreasonable. What a punt, what a roll of a dice to get back to normal. And normalcy is Labour in 3rd or 4th place in the polls. It's possible. But this is the thing. Burnham right now has I would call it the ooh shiny factor. Elizabeth Warren had it in 2020. She appeared on the scene. She took a lot of votes from Bernie Sanders. That's why Joe Biden was able to get through the middle. People project onto them what they see in themselves, all things to all men. And to his credit, or rather discredit, Burnham has been able to do that. He has been able to say a lot of things, sometimes shooting from the hip, with not much care in the world. Insert comment about what he said about rejoin, which he since supposedly, I suppose, rode back on now. You may have, to an extent, some form of honeymoon, because unlike Starmer, didn't really have the public favorability for any length of time. He never really topped out above 40% or whatever with a favorability. The public were always quite cynical about him. He was just the least worst option on the ballot paper in 2024. It's different for Burnham. He might have a public willing to give him a chance. I think it could last quite some time, but to what extent, you don't know. It could represent a reset of a conversation if he is seen, performative or not, practical or not, to make a difference. That is up to him and whoever he appoints and surrounds himself with, isn't it?
From your perspective, will the make or break be what he actually does? Like, because it's difficult to see in a way living standards significantly increasing just because Andy Burnham's in Downing Street. So the hope is presumably that there's a moderate improvement and just much better communication. I mean, can we expect anything other than that?
No. No, probably not. Perception always matters more than reality. In voters who spend more of their time on Facebook, they just have to be seen. They have to be seen to be doing good, seen to be keeping things in order. Keir Starmer was never able to manage the scene. The scene was always made for him. Let's see if Burnham does otherwise. Let's see if anything necessarily changed. I bet you if Burnham ever... I bet you this, the day after Burnham gets elected, if indeed he does, is the day we start seeing more attention on the bond markets, gilt yields. We're doing a tracker of this. This is what happened. Burnham's walked into Downing Street. What do the bond markets say? How you control the narrative matters a great deal. I fear it might be controlled for him from a market perspective. But perception is everything.
That was Ben Walker from Britain Predicts and the New Statesman speaking to me earlier today. Following the conviction of 4 Palestine Action activists earlier this month, a number of reporting restrictions that were in place during that trial, as well as an earlier one, have now been lifted. And what they reveal is how far the judge in the case, Mr. Justice Johnson, went to restrict what information the jury was allowed to hear from those defendants. Now, one of those restrictions involved what defences those facing charges were allowed to air in front of the jury. And prior to the trial, the judge ordered that the defendants could not disclose any of the following. So, their reasons for joining Palestine Action, their beliefs about Elbit's supply of weapons to Israel for its use in the war in Gaza, their views about the actions of Israel in Gaza or its legality, or their purpose in causing damage to property at the factory beyond an intention to destroy it, or any other evidence which is irrelevant to the issues which the jury are required to determine. The media, including us, were restricted from reporting on this order. But a defence barrister in the first trial hinted at a jury's right to acquit on any grounds. That was during his closing arguments. And he was himself prosecuted for contempt by the judge, who claimed that he'd undermined his instructions. Now, Menon, he's the barrister in question, challenged the prosecution and last week won in the Court of Appeal. Again, though, that prosecution, so the prosecution of this barrister in the case, was also subject to a reporting restriction. So this sort of quite remarkable instance of a barrister getting prosecuted for what they've said in court, I don't think many people sort of know that can happen, right? It's definitely of interest. It's in the public interest to know. The media couldn't report on it. Again, they would say this is just because of our court restriction laws. It's not a conspiracy, but I mean, it's notable. Let's say at best. There was also another aspect of the case that the judge ordered to be withheld from the jury. The combination of these does paint quite a picture. That was the fact that if the defendants were found guilty of the crimes they were accused of, so namely criminal damage for all of them, and for one of them grievous bodily harm, the judge, in his sentencing, could then decide whether to sentence them as terrorist offences as well. So at a pre-trial hearing, the judge found there was a terror connection in the case. That was even before Palestine Action had been prescribed. But the jury in the case were not allowed to be told about the alleged terror connection. And with the media, again, once subject to reporting restrictions. So the jury couldn't be told about the motives of the defendants. And they were also not told that if they found the defendants guilty, of what the jury believed was just criminal damage and grievous bodily harm, they could without any further input from a jury, have their sentences upgraded and extended by a judge to sort of reclassify those crimes also as terror offences. So I suppose to sort of add these as additional elements of the convictions. Throughout, the media, again, couldn't report on any of this. So all of this was sort of happening behind the scenes. Court reporters would know, but it would be illegal to report on it. It's not one of those cases where they say, well, if they all knew, why don't they say? Because you could go to jail if you say, right? Because you could collapse a court case. So there's a good reason legally why no one could report on this, but this was all going on behind the scenes. Obviously, the defendants knew all of this all the time. They just couldn't say it publicly, which I imagine was very frustrating. Now, someone who has seen this convoluted and secretive process from the inside is Jordan Devlin. He was one of the 2 defendants who was found not guilty of criminal damage in the latest trial. So one of the 6 who went on trial and one of the 2 who was found not guilty of all charges. So exonerated on all charges, Jordan spoke to my colleague Stephen Methven late last week. And Stephen began by asking him how it felt to be free.
For me, it's not really over yet, aside from having some restrictions on what I can say. I still feel embedded in part of the 4 that have been imprisoned, and I need to advocate for them. So on the 12th of June, whenever they'll be sentenced, I need to make sure they have as much protection as possible, because it really is such a wild situation to be in. And, they could be defenseless otherwise. So I just don't think emotions and feelings can take precedent right now. We need to put that aside.
When you talk about it being a wild situation, I mean, are you talking there about the kind of disparity in the verdicts when it comes to criminal damage claims? So, for example, you and Zoe Rogers were completely cleared of it, but your 4 other defendants haven't been. Is that what you mean by the wild situation?
Well, I really mean about the terrorism connection for sentencing. So they were found guilty under criminal damage, and that's as far as the jury was aware. They weren't allowed to know that it's likely this judge will find a terrorism connection, which means the actual sentence that they will receive is dramatically more than what they would actually do under normal circumstances. And the particular amount of prison time will go up exponentially because of the way this is done. So normally it would be time served, hands down. They have done, they'll have done 21 months by that point, and that is more than the maximum already. Because of the terrorism connection, they could, even if they do another year on their sentence, they'll have to do 2/3 of that more in custody. And if they don't pass parole, they'll have to do 100% of it in custody. So once they finish their minimum 5 years, they will also be on notice to the police and have to report every relationship they ever have, every time they change their phone address, bank details, anything like that. For it could be 10 to 15 years, but I think it could be as long as 30 years. It's completely life-changing.
Yeah, I was going to bring up this terrorist connection. So this has been subject to a reporting restriction that was lifted by the judge this week. So it's not been possible to report until now that the judge did find that there was a possibility of a terrorist connection here. But that was to be withheld from the jury throughout this trial. So the idea is that the jury is finding the defendants guilty or not guilty on the basis of the criminal law. But actually, the sentencing that could be applied is, as you say, going to be potentially much, much longer, depending on whether the judge, when it comes to sentencing, actually finds on the evidence that in his view, there is a terrorist connection here. What was that like for you as you were going through the trial, knowing that there was this aspect that was facing you and your co-defendants that just couldn't be mentioned to the jury and couldn't be mentioned in the press?
I've obviously known about the possibility of the terror connection for over a year, so I've had plenty of time to adjust to that. But there's an element of compartmentalization where it's best to just focus on the things at hand right now and do this trial as best we can, because we know that this judge is not giving us an even playing field, and we have to work with that. He's so powerful as a high court judge that there's just no possibility of, talking to him reasonably, really.
So I was going to ask you about something that he said when in his ruling, where he was establishing that there's a potential terrorist connection, was that he agreed with your lawyers that that going into the Albert factory wasn't an attempt to influence the British government, but he thought that it could have been an attempt to influence the Israeli government by depriving them of weapons, I think he said. What do you think of this idea that this connection should be drawn out when it's not? I mean, I know it's part of the law. The law actually defines a government in the Act as the British government or a British government agency, I think, or another government. But what do you think about the fact that it was made out on the basis of an attempt to persuade the policy of another government?
So this judge has made these comments quite a long time ago, and before we've given any evidence. So his argument is that he hasn't heard any evidence to the contrary, but we haven't given evidence yet, so that's obviously impossible. And yes, as he said, he thinks we're trying to influence the government of Israel by depriving them of weapons. Direct action is not about trying to influence anything. It's just, we are in an emergency. There's a genocide taking place, and we need to stop that happening immediately.
Now, what you've just said to me there as a justification for doing what you did, that there's a genocide taking place, it's an emergency, action has to be taken. That was also something that you weren't allowed to say during the trials, right? Because you weren't allowed to use the idea of a lawful excuse for the criminal damage.
That's right. Immediacy is one of the elements of lawful excuse in any other trial that we've been strictly denied. So you have the classic firefighter breaking into a burning building metaphor that we're not allowed to bring up. Somebody is in trouble right now. You can't wait for red tape and bureaucracy. That person is going to potentially die if you don't act immediately. And the argument I wasn't allowed to present to the judge would have been, there are software updates in the computers inside this Elbit factory that are potentially sending, right at that very moment, updates for the drones that are already in Israel to be more efficient at killing Palestinians. The other lawful excuses we had, protection of property. So we're stopping people's houses from being blown up. We're protecting lives. That's obviously the point of these drones. The judge has he has admitted that these drones are used to kill people, and if we didn't damage them, people would be seriously injured or die. That's his own sentiment. But we're still not allowed to say we have a lawful excuse.
I mean, obviously you're allowed to say it now, but it's too late when it comes to the jury in the case of your co-defendants, because it wasn't part of what they were allowed to present to the jury at any point, right?
They've secured their conviction. They don't really care about the decisions made by the jury now. They've got what they wanted to some degree. They haven't pulled it off flawlessly, obviously. We've had some success in it, but given that this is such a stitch up, really, it's such an uphill struggle, and we were starting in such a bad position, legally speaking, that it is profound that we kind of did get that far. But it's still really upsetting that my friends are remanded immediately to custody, and that was completely unnecessary. The prosecution didn't ask for that.
Why do you think that's happened then?
It could be indicative of the judge's intent to find the terror connection on the 12th, and it could be because he's just enjoying being cruel, or he is under strong guidance to put the fear into all protesters around the UK that if you dissent from any mainstream political opinion, we are going to crack down with, extreme authoritarianism.
So obviously one thing that was happening sort of parallel to your criminal case, but also that sort of happened after you'd already been remanded in custody, is the prescription of Palestine Action, of highly political event, passed by Parliament, then taken to judicial review, where it was found that the Home Secretary had acted unlawfully in prescribing it, but it's now gone to an appeal, and the prescription is still in place. So, it's still illegal for people to express support for Palestine Action publicly. What was the impact of that case on you while you were on remand and preparing for your own trial, and in fact also during your trial? Did you feel that there was any connection, any overlap that was happening?
I mean, obviously, whenever you have someone like the Home Secretary going on mainstream news and saying we're bad people, the jury, some of the jury will have heard that, and that is directly meddling with our case. Like, from the get-go, we haven't had a fair trial, and we haven't been set up to have a fair trial. But the fact that this is at government level, speaking publicly, and that's not legal, but the whole thing should have been thrown out, really, because there's no prospect of a fair trial.
When you say there's no prospect of a fair trial, what do you mean?
There's so many stages of what we've went through with, the scope of evidence being limited so much, our barristers being silenced, and obviously Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer's slander. We didn't really have the grounds to present the truth. We're completely silenced, and the jury are not going to hear the full picture, and you can't call that fair.
So I guess that's left you with a pretty dim view of the British justice system at the moment.
Which is really interesting, because I was a juror once myself, and I thought going into that, wow, the British system really is what people say it is. I thought that was a really fair experience that they gave that defendant at the time, and he really actually had a chance. Going through it myself, and you see what happens behind closed doors, I'm kind of, it's a complete farce.
That was Jordan Devlin speaking to Stephen last week. Jordan mentioned in that interview the idea of the Home Secretary meddling in their case. There have now been further developments around that claim. So in August last year, then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper wrote an article in The Observer with an attempt to justify the prescription of Palestine Action, and which she disclosed certain details of the Filton case. So in it, she wrote this: Palestine Action has claimed responsibility for and promoted on its website attacks that have seen those allegedly involved subsequently charged with violent disorder, grievous bodily harm with intent, actual bodily harm, criminal damage, and aggravated burglary. Charges that include, in the assessment of the Independent Crown Prosecution Service, a terrorism connection. Now, at the time, the terrorism connection had not been made public, and you can imagine how revealing it might prejudice a trial long before a jury was selected, with potential jurors already having in mind, from the Home Secretary no less, that the defendants were terrorists. That didn't stop Cooper, though, who may well have gone against her own legal advice when she published that article. So it can now be revealed that in a pre-trial hearing on whether Cooper was in contempt of court in revealing those facts, Mr. Justice Johnson said this: it is to be taken that the Home Secretary was specifically advised that going ahead with the article might prejudice these proceedings, and that she went ahead anyway. The CPS made representations to the Home Secretary about the risk of prejudice. It follows that the Home Secretary took the action that she did and made the public statements that she did in the knowledge that these proceedings were extant and that there might well be a question as to the impact of her conduct and her statements on these proceedings. Despite that, the judge didn't find that Cooper had committed a contempt. I'm saying this. The decision to prescribe Palestine Action was highly controversial and required public justification. It is unsurprising that the government sought publicly to justify the decision that it had taken and that it relied in general terms without naming individuals on Palestine Action's activities, including the activities that have resulted in these proceedings. In doing so, the Home Secretary ran a risk of causing some prejudice to these proceedings, but that is different from deliberately flouting a reporting restriction order. So, sort of putting these two stories together, we couldn't have reported that if these defendants were convicted of criminal damage, it could then be sentenced as a terrorism offence and they would go to prison for a lot longer.
Yes,
we couldn't say that, but Yvette Cooper could imply that in an article in the Times.
Yes, so it's two different things. So one is that the order, as I understand it, wasn't in place at the time that Yvette Cooper wrote this thing. But the complaint that's being made is of a general contempt, right? So you know when a criminal case begins, you'll know this, you have to stop reporting on it, except for the barest details, because you don't want to influence a jury. So that's a kind of restriction under the Contempt Act, I think.
Yeah.
There are other forms of contempt which are then the violating of court orders that are put in place by the judge during the course of the trial. So we would have been in violation of a court order. I don't think Cooper would have been in violation of a court order because I don't think the order was in place yet. But the question is whether or not she still was speaking about a live trial in a way which would potentially prejudice a jury against the defendants. And at the time, we pointed out that it was kind of unprecedented for a Home Secretary to go out on the media and scaremonger about Palestine Action while the prescription was still ongoing, links to Iran, mysterious plots that were never ever sort of articulated in any way. What we didn't know at the time, because we didn't know about the details of the case, was that there was also this other potential prejudicial thing that she was doing in making those statements, which involved the criminal case involving the criminal case, which has just ended.
Yeah, that makes sense. Could any of this undermine those convictions, or?
I don't know. That is really a question for their lawyers and the appeals court if they wanted to appeal. I mean, I will say on the defences, the judge ruling out what defences can and can't be made. And look, I'm not a lawyer, although actually I've done so much of this stuff. I feel like I should get an honorary law degree at this point. But it's the idea here is that on criminal damage, for example, take that as an example, you've got to show there are three things to be the case to convict someone of criminal damage. One is that it's someone else's property. Two is that it's damaged. And three is that there's no lawful excuse for it.
Yeah.
And the question of what constitutes a lawful excuse has generally been up to the jury. It's like the person makes their claim about why they did it, and the jury decides, okay, does that make it lawful or not? Increasingly, it's the case that is being restricted by judges. I've said this many times. And when it comes to
obviously
various kinds of direct action.
To take a really simple, if you smash someone's car with a hammer, you've met the first two. But if there was a baby inside that was crying or a dog that was dying, you can say there was just cause, and they could say that the genocide in Gaza was similar to there being like a baby crying in a car.
And exactly, it also doesn't have to be. So yeah, that's a really good case. So there's a baby screaming in the car. It's very, very hot. There's no one around. You smash the glass, someone else's property, and you've damaged it. It doesn't even matter whether the baby is in fact actually suffering or dying at that point. It's just whether you had a reasonable belief that it was. So actually, the bar is relatively low.
But this is a bit like a court case where the jury finds out that the guy had a hammer and smashed the car.
Yeah.
But they're banned. There are reporting constrictions on the fact that there was a crying baby inside.
Right, exactly. Or they're not to know. Exactly why they did
smash it in the first place?
I mean, I guess the judge here would say something like, "Well, look, this is actually like a clear case where if you hadn't done something, someone would have something. You had a reasonable belief that if you hadn't acted, that baby would have died or suffered great injury." And he might be thinking, "Well, actually, it doesn't follow that if they hadn't gone to the Elbit factory, something bad would have happened." But he's deciding that rather than a jury deciding that. And I think that for many people, that will seem some sort of circumvention of the job of a jury, but also circumvention of a kind of sense of what natural justice is, that you can sort of explain yourself to your peers and see whether or not they accept your explanation.
Yeah, it's strange, because why did they do it? I'd have thought it's such a sort of classic case that a jury might be interested in.
I mean, they were allowed to say some things about why they did it. They just couldn't use it as a lawful excuse. So they could say things like, I witnessed this happening on TV. I couldn't, that was okay. What they couldn't do was say, I was stepping in order to stop this by doing this because this factory is doing these things.
Well, that is a subtle distinction. So that was a scene from Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom rally held in London on Saturday. And in case you couldn't quite make out what was going on there, that was an Islamophobic influencer, Ryan Williams, playing the cello while wearing bacon over his shoulder, I guess to ward off Muslims and Jews. Novara Media's Richard Hames went down to the demonstration where he was trying to find out what exactly unites the Unite the Kingdom demonstrators. So he asked them, what do you believe? The answers were pretty diverse.
The Crusaders, yeah. Texas back in the day. People, the immigrants who come over, invaders, slaughtered them basically, but that's what they had to do.
And you think that should happen again?
Not slaughter, but we need our country back. This is our country. We built it, so why should they come over and take it all? It's not a Muslim country, it's a Christian country.
We are the most diverse country in the whole world, yeah? We don't care who comes. Mr. Bossman cutting me hair. You walk down, chicken shop, things like that. We are very diverse, we're a very nice country, but we don't like taking the piss. And we have voted for illegal immigration to stop. We shouldn't have open borders. We live in a country where we should have controlled borders. If you want to come here legally, get a visa, offer something to the country. But if you're coming here illegally, I'm sorry, it might offend you, it might hurt you, but you're not welcome.
Full remigration. Full remigration. It's not okay. We can't cope with the numbers in this country at all. We really can't.
Small islands, we're going to sink.
We are a small island. We're sinking financially and violently.
I'm here today to represent the homeless veterans, mainly, and stop the boats and to get Keir Starmer out and everything else. It's a whole pickle barrel. Someone comes off a rubber boat, they get housed within a month. My daughter, who's 25, who's got double hip displacement, right, can't even get on the fucking housing register because it's all been taken up by all these illegals and stuff. And I'm terrified every time she goes out. It's absolutely terrifying.
Tommy Robinson, we love you.
They love Tommy around here. They love him.
You love Tommy Robinson as well?
Not really. I don't agree with Tommy Robinson promoting all these bitcoins, these cryptocurrencies. He's basically using his platform to make money, I think.
There was a thing called UTK last time, the cryptocurrency that was funded at, crashed immediately after the rally.
Oh, yeah, that's a rug pull. That's just a classic rug pull. I mean, it's obvious.
That's a really interesting report. I mean, it's doing very well on YouTube. Lots of people watching it. You really heard sort of the range of beliefs on that demonstration. Some of them you might think were false. Some of them you might think were wrong. Some of them you might think were offensive. In that part of the video, though, or the little clip we showed you, most of them had some internal coherence, I suppose. That wasn't always the case, though.
Melania is Princess Diana in disguise. Yeah.
And Tommy Robinson, who's he?
I don't know. Everyone's in masks at the moment. Everyone you're seeing on the TV, the media has been took over by the white hats, and they're all in masks. I've actually seen Michael Jackson on it. I've got videos of him on Sky News where he's dressed up as a woman. You can't get rid of Michael Jackson. You know who he is. He's clear as day. So he's playing someone as a woman. But I've got it all on my phone. You can see it's Michael.
I had no idea what was going on there. Last year's Unite the Kingdom march attracted an audience of around 150,000 people. This year, police estimate a little more than a third of that number turned out. With some 60,000 people taken to the streets of the capital. They were treated to incendiary rhetoric.
Men, are you ready to get fit? Are you ready to become the best version of yourself? As men, British men, we need to get fight ready because a fight's coming to this country.
God, it makes my skin crawl, that. I mean, one of the things I find most outrageous from like some characters on GB News, people who are in the mainstream, is the normalization of the referring to people coming in boats as fighting age men. Like that's you hear sort of like Tories and reform politicians say it as well. And there is just a real attempt on the right, the far right and the right, to sort of whip up the idea that there's a civil war coming. And it's grotesque. It's obviously incitement, even though they seem to be getting away with it. Islamophobia was not hidden, of course. These were the chilling words of anti-trans activist Kelly J. Keane.
It's not too late to get Islam out of that building. It is not too late to get Islam out of every single official office in this country. And more than not too late, it is absolutely vital. If we want to save this country, we have to remove Islam from every single place of authority.
Now you can imagine if you replace Islam with Judaism, Keir Starmer would be doing a press conference from Downing Street, right? It does seem like this just goes relatively unnoticed, like the most outrageous Islamophobia. Their sort of conspiratorial version, we need to get Islam out of all areas of power. There was also just sort of outright cruel mockery.
Take it off! Take it off! Take it.
Putting the racism to one side, not that we should, but just for now, go with this for a moment. It was the crimes against harmony that stood out from the Unite the Right demonstrations.
And you never walk alone. Come on. You never walk alone. Lift it up, come on.
Was at the start of that clip when I saw it on the wig, I was like, I've never heard a gospel choir sound quite so bad. But then I was like, the singer, so he's apparently a man named Ricky Doolan. He is the doppelganger of recently murdered in jail paedophile and former Lost Prophet frontman Ian Watkins. So this is Ian Watkins. This is Ricky Doolan. Let's get Ricky Doolan up. Now, if my style was so similar to a recently murdered convicted paedophile, I'd probably change the colour of my hair. Maybe make the beard and the hair the same colour, or flip it perhaps. On a more serious note, Ricky Doolan is a pastor who bizarrely features heavily in an Al Jazeera expose of a money laundering operation in Zimbabwe. He's filmed speaking here to an undercover journalist posing as a black market money trader.
We want to be very clear. We are pro-cash rich. It's embarrassing. It's not rich.
Good, I like embarrassing cash.
The problem is, and we want to all be clear,
absolutely,
this is black money. This is money which cannot be declared.
Okay. I understand. Right? Probably part of the reason you're targeting Africa.
Exactly.
Not much ambiguity there. The operation allegedly involved international businessmen using foreign illicit cash to purchase gold directly from mines in Zimbabwe, which would then be transported to Dubai and be sold for legitimate cash. Ricky Doolan bragged to the undercover journalist, quote, "It's a good washing machine, right?" So that's, you've got Tommy Robinson and his Bitcoin connections. You've got that pastor singing terribly on stage who, by most accounts seems to have been involved in some money laundering in Zimbabwe. Very, very odd. And Richard Hames was there. Great report. Lots of people watching it. Great feedback. Was there anything that united the people on the Unite the Kingdom rally? That was the question you set out to answer. What conclusion did you come to?
I think really there is something that unites them, right? Which is that they are all disconnected from the conventional stories that we tell ourselves as people connected more or less to kind of the mainstream of thought. Not in the sense that we all believe the same things, that we're all sort of good law-abiding liberals, right? But that we have a notion of how political power works in the UK that is relatively sort of coherent and that sort of looks at institutions, or we think about the power of capital to rule people's lives and so on. And what you get out there in the Unite the Right rally is something like a kind of a rainforest, what I think of as an epistemic rainforest, right? Where any kind of claim you can imagine and some you can't can live freely and cross-hybridize with other claims. There's a real sense of sort of anything goes. And I think that is the thing that unites them, right? That there isn't the same kind of perhaps rational process, or that we kind of imagine or hope, right, underlies discourse in a kind of normal way, where I ask you how you know something. There's almost like an additive way of discussing things that I sort of witnessed and I have with people, where each idea can sort of be added on something else, but it doesn't necessarily sort of have to cohere with it. That's not to say, right, that there aren't core ideas here. There are core ideas. One of them is sort of broad brush Islamophobia, where that's confused on this particular march by the presence of the large segment of Iranian nationalists, some of whom, though, were pretty keen to tell me at extraordinary volume that Iran is not an Islamic country. It has no connection to Islam at all. That's one part, the Islamophobia. There's also, of course, a nebulous idea that Britain is good, right? But people across the political spectrum can think that, and you can fill that in lots of different ways. So you can think that Britain is good because it's the foundation, historically speaking, of lots of liberalism, right? Which is a view that people express to me. They're like, we invented liberalism, that's good. You can think that Britain is good because it is a Christian nation. You can think that Britain is good because it is, the home of crusaders from times past. And, you can sort of pick why Britain is good. So even though there is this basic idea, Britain, good, it's just a kind of it's an extremely thin proposition, which then gets filled out in lots of different, very confusing and also mutually contradictory ways. So there are things that unite people, right? But they are not necessarily the kinds of things that you would want if you're going to structure a large-scale political movement around something. But fortunately, I don't really think that's what these days are about. I don't think that the purpose of these movements is to produce sustained form of power that can move between these days. I think it's really about the days, and then how that performance of power gets packaged up for the various influencers who benefit from this, and who can then sort of use that influence elsewhere in let's say the influential market, right? Kind of package up. Oh, I can get this many people out onto the streets, and then I can go elsewhere and I can sort of sell that influence. I can say, well, I can give this audience to someone else who people who will follow me. But that's go on.
I mean, it's always a difficult question to ask. It's very difficult to ascertain, but like the proportions of what type of people are on the demo. Because the guy in the bucket hat in the clip we showed, he kind of just had a normie. I mean, maybe he has other beliefs, but what were expressed in that clip were quite normie right-wing opinions, which is he's fine with immigrants, people of colour, as long as they haven't come here illegally, which is probably a majority position in the country. But then you spoke to people who want remigration, which is a much more sort of extreme position. And then on the stage, you have people saying, get Islam out of any sort of place of authority, which, to me reads as sort of saying, let's purge Muslims from parliament. And then the guy with the bacon. I mean, do you have a sense of to what extent people on there had normie right-wing opinions, and to what extent they had extreme right-wing opinions, and to what extent they just had really wacky conspiratorial opinions? Did you get a sense from being there how it divided up between those different strands?
Yes, I could give you a sort of a percentage-wise sort of distinction between those different parts. But I think one thing to say before I do that is that it's often a mistake when we think about the far right to think of them as having very distinctive different beliefs. And this is a way that liberalism is very good at describing itself, right? It's like, we are over here, we have sensible liberal beliefs, and the far right is over here and it has extremism. And it has this kind of thing. It has misogyny, it has racism, it has anti-Semitism, it has conspiratorial thought. We don't have any of those things. But if you think about the ways in which these two things are sort of in a circuit with each other, right? What you might call the extremism flywheel has been sort of operative in British politics for the last 16 years, let's say, since the Conservatives' election in 2010, where there is a kind of a far right that kind of pressurizes the mainstream. The mainstream adopts what it does, right? It says we have to implement the far right's ideas because otherwise they'll get to implement them. And then that means that we have to shift ourselves to the right, but it'll be fine because it's just us. We're still liberals. And you get that with the Conservative government, and you get that with the Labour government as well. And then, of course, as that works, people gather over on the far right in greater numbers, as we've seen for the last 16 years, and their ability to push discourse further right increases. And so there's a mutual relationship, right? It's not just that we have sort of normies and people on the right. They're sort of in some sort of complex feedback loop between each other. As for the proportions of people who had relatively normal beliefs, right, who are participating in a kind of like a hardened version of what the state already does, I would say that's probably about 40% of people who we spoke to. And we weren't, I should say, I mean, it looks from the video perhaps like we were going after people who were dressed strangely or dressed up or kind of, looked like they might have something interesting to say. That's not the case, right? We were just trying to talk to people sort of more or less, it's a more or less average sample. So I'd say 40% of people were more or less kind of like had normal beliefs. I would say there was perhaps 20% of people had kind of more like fringe or conspiratorial beliefs of one kind or another. So the woman who's putting about the QAnon conspiracy beliefs that you saw in that clip earlier. Other people who had just really strange collections of views. Like we saw a woman who was wearing a keffiyeh with the current Iranian flag on, so the Islamic Republic of Iran flag, where all these like Iranian monarchists are waving the old flag of Iran with the lion on. We saw a woman with that. We thought, okay, well, she's in the wrong march, and we said, "Are you in the wrong march?" She said, "No. I'm here because I'm trying to get to Patriotic Alternative, who are sort of a very far right political party in the UK, whose leader Mark Collett has often been accused of being anti-Semite." Right, so you kind of think, okay, well, there are some people here who have much darker anti-Semitic beliefs than much more sort of conspiratorial views of the world than perhaps those sort of like those kind of noisy right people. That's about 20%. And then 20% perhaps in the middle of people who had pretty far sort of down the line, much further right beliefs than are conventional in society, but weren't actively in a kind of conspiratorial bent. They had what I think of as sort of like hard right or kind of near fascist beliefs, but they weren't balmy, right? In the way that some people in that clip painfully were.
Richard Hames, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, our viewers can check out that video on YouTube, although you don't need me to advertise it because it is already flying. So thank you so much for making a great video and for joining us this evening. And thank you, Stephen, for joining me tonight. We've had a long show today, but there was an awful lot to talk about. If you have enjoyed the show, if you generally enjoy the show, of course, and if you haven't already, do consider becoming a regular supporter at novara.media.com/support. We really do appreciate it. It is your regular donations that keep this show on the road. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.